Hello there, and welcome to the I Never Knew podcast, also known as Inc. This show dives into the life experiences of people who have been through it all and have come through the other side stronger, better, and triumphant. Each story is raw, authentic, and, at times, heartbreaking. One thing joins it all together: the fact that the stories can help the listener learn and grow. Hosted by life coach Maureen, she sits down each episode with a new guest who will empower the listener to set out on their self-discovery journey and start to heal. Now you'll be joined by Maureen and her special guest. Please enjoy the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our new episode of I Never Knew Inc., but my dog did podcast. I'm so excited to be with you today. I am Maureen Scanlon, or Life Coach Maureen, author, speaker, and podcast host extraordinaire, I'd like to think. I have a wonderful guest today, and what really is amazing for me is when this guest reached out, it was almost as if myself was reaching out to me because our stories are so similar. And as you all know, my backstory, what she talks about is so near and dear to me, but there's a spin on it. So I just cannot wait to get started. So today I'm going to talk to Erin Hass, and I hope I said it right. So Erin is, on my wrong page here. So here we go. So Erin has worked as a victim advocate for their district attorney's office for 7 years, which I think is magical that she's a part of the legal system making a change and has also lived it. So I think there's a level of empathy there that a lot of people don't have. And she handles all the domestic violence cases. She's married with 3 amazing children. So Erin grew up, and we're going to talk about her story, and I'm going to let her talk about it, but her personal experience with domestic violence growing up as a child, she's going to talk about that. So she wrote a book, and I cannot wait to talk about the book because she has 2 questions that get answered in the book, and her book is called The Ones Left Behind, Behind the Scenes of Domestic Violence. And it takes you on a journey through the trauma and triumph of the main character as she experiences her own domestic violence relationship. It touches on the different forms of abuse that contribute to domestic violence relationships. It also answers some of the commonly asked questions. Why doesn't a person leave, and why would they go back? And I can't wait to deep dive into that. So without any more hesitation, I want to say hello, Miss Erin, and welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be on this podcast, so thank you.
I am so glad you're here. And guys, if it sounds a little bit echoey, it's because she's actually talking to us from her office at work. So I'm so pleased that she took the time out of her day to do this, and I'm so grateful. So as we know, we start off with our stories and what we never knew, and being that you grew up in this domestic violence situation, tell us about that. Tell us about your childhood.
Yeah, so I did grow up in a domestic violence household. It wasn't so much physical that I saw, but definitely there was a lot of verbal and emotional abuse. Objects would get broken, and it wasn't a relaxed household. The only time, I hate to say this, but that it felt relaxed is when my dad wouldn't be home. I'm the youngest of 3, and my sisters are 7 and 9 years older than me. So they left home, while I still had quite a few years left to be there by myself. And it never failed. When I'd get home from school, I'd be out in the living room relaxing, but the second my dad would get home, I would go be in my room until my mom came home. And then eventually that evening, there would always be fighting. My dad was a functioning alcoholic, and I would just hear a lot of screaming and my mom crying. And then eventually my dad would go downstairs into his man cave, so to speak. And my mom would come into my room upset, and I would be there for her. But it wasn't, don't get me wrong, I didn't have a terrible childhood, but it wasn't a great example of what a healthy relationship looked like growing up.
Yes. You said some really important things there. I love how we condition it because I was raised in the same type of household. There wasn't physical abuse, but there was just arguing continuously. And my mother didn't have a nurturing upbringing, so it reflected on us. And there was just so much criticism, and it was tense. And so mine was tense when my mom was there, and they worked opposite shifts. So one worked days and one worked nights, but you just conditioned it where you said it wasn't a terrible childhood. It's funny that we do that because I feel guilty still to this day, even though this is the work that I do, saying, I think this might have been abusive, or I think this might have been mentally damaging to me. I still have those triggers. So I thank you for showing us that even in the field that you're working in, we still have those deep-seated triggers. And that normalcy that we had, the norm of just fighting, how did that affect your relationships when you went out as an adult and got into relationships?
So I, would tell myself, man, I'm never going to be this type of relationship. And I really didn't think I would, but unfortunately, my first real relationship was after high school when I was in college. And it didn't start out like like how all relationships that turn domestic violence, it didn't start out like that. It was a gradual decline, and I never fully realized that I was losing myself in it. Everybody around me did, but I didn't. And I started losing myself and what I used to stand for. And so, thinking that I'd never be in a relationship where there would be yelling or crying all the time or being put down or isolated, I did end up falling right into that. But it just goes to show that it happens so slowly, you're not even aware that you're in it, and you just, through the process, lose yourself.
Yeah. And I think with any abuse, it's grooming. They don't just jump right into this relationship and start beating you or start, calling you names. And I'm so happy that you brought that up because it's so subtle that we don't even recognize it. I lived the same thing that you did. And tell us what you think. And especially when you saw it at home, you think, oh, I'm not going to do that. Or even if you were, and there's no shame in it. I think we feel shame when we don't recognize it and that we allowed it to happen, but it's really not your fault. If you went into these relationships just hopeful and looking for love and wanting the best, we just put those rose-colored glasses on. Or as I posted something the other day that I saw on Facebook, we were colorblind to the red flags. So what do you think are the things that you and I missed at the beginning? What do you think the subtle little things along the way at the beginning were things that we could help our listeners identify right from the get-go so they don't lose themselves?
I think honestly, because at first it started so happy, where, the other person seemed truly interested in what I had to say and what my thoughts were about anything. And they would buy me gifts just to show that they were thinking of me or that, they loved me. And so when there would be a time that we would have an argument or there would be a fight or he would do something, I would kind of minimize it to myself and think, well, all couples fight, or, and I think that's one thing, is you tend to minimize it because you know how happy you were, and you hope that it goes back to that. And so, you kind of just justify it in some way, whether you say, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't have said this, or I know I was cranky, or maybe they're overtired, and you just slowly make excuses for why it's okay. But I think that's part of what keeps you in that cycle and keeps you slowly losing yourself and what you stand for before you even end that relationship, because you just start justifying the actions or making excuses for it. So I would say, don't make excuses. There's actions that are just absolutely not okay, no matter what somebody tries to say to justify it. It's just not okay.
Yes, that's that. Minimizing and no excuses is what I wrote down that you said. I really love that, because I would do the same thing. I would say, well, it's not that bad. So what? He just yelled at me. Or so what? Maybe he's in a bad mood. Maybe he's this. Maybe he's that. Was your abuser, did he have any addictions?
We both drank. Okay. So I would say it was something we both participated in every evening. I mean, I had a good job. He had a good job, so it wasn't like we just sat at home and that's all we did, was drink and argue. But yeah, that is what our struggle was. I don't say that that's an excuse for what happened, though. I know a lot of times it's easy to try to put it on an addiction or mental health, which those can be contributing factors for sure, but it still doesn't excuse or justify somebody's behavior. And also I had found out towards the end, was also unfaithful throughout the entire relationship. So I think that led a lot to his paranoia and controllingness over me. Not wanting or thinking, what if I'm doing what he's doing, even though I wasn't.
Yeah. All of that fits in. So I have an accreditation in toxic relationships and narcissistic relationships, and all of that goes hand in hand. And, when you sort of are in that mentality of not knowing your worth, you do say, well, if he wasn't drinking, he's great when he's not drinking. He's great when he's not doing drugs. And then the paranoia sets in. If they're unfaithful, you're right. They're doing something. They know how shady that is. And so they try to gaslight and make it look like you are. I remember my abuser would say, because I worked night shift and I would be all dressed up, and he'd say, what are you doing? Are you going to meet your boyfriend? And I'd say, no. And he was unfaithful. You are absolutely right. They do that. So if you see that blame continuously, and I want to tell our listeners too, this is something that I realized. I didn't have just one of those relationships. I ended up with quite a few of them because I was a slow learner and I didn't find my self-worth until I was 45. But one thing that they all have in common is they love bomb. They make it, and that's the grooming process. That is, they love bomb you. They do everything. They make you feel like you're the world, you're the best thing, so that you love them so much and you need them, more need than anything else. You need that. That feels so good, that validation. And then they can start doing the things that they want to do, which is the controlling, the isolating. And you've already develop this mindset that I need this person, and whatever they do, I have to do it because I don't know what I would do without them. And they'll say things like that, right? They'll say, give me an example of some of the things they say when they love bomb you, Erin.
Oh, just, about how much they love you, how much you've made their life better. They don't know what they would do without you. You're the only one that they actually truly feel comfortable with. In my situation, the person I was with didn't come from a good upbringing. So he didn't have much family around him. And I am one of those people that like to help, and for me, I think that was a vulnerability that I had that he took advantage of, because he knew what to say about how I was the one in his life that he didn't have before. And so I always felt guilty in a sense of, man, I'm actually showing him that somebody can care about him and be there for him. And, it would be another form of justification I would use on my part to excuse his behavior. And it would be easy for him to know the right things to say to kind of make me second guess leaving.
Oh yeah, because they know they work on they prey on the weaknesses that you have, and 99.9% of the time it's empathic people that get with the narcissist, because they hone in on the narcissist hones in on the weakness, and the empath is a fixer and wants to make everybody happy, and we're people pleasers. And when you grew up in a household like you did and like I did, we were already codependent. We were already making everybody happy. So why wouldn't we go into a relationship where, of course, we'd make everybody happy? It was just sort of this evolution of it had to be that way, because that was the belief system we had, right?
Yeah. It's unfortunate, that it can even happen from childhood and just stick with you through adulthood too. So, yeah.
How do you help families now? Tell us how you got into this field, which is amazing, because a lot of people would say, oh, that would be too triggering based on my history. How did you get into the field, and how do you feel this is your purpose and you're making a difference for others? I always say, I want to be the voice my younger self needed, and I think you are to those.
Yeah, so I've always loved and been interested in the criminal justice field, but I also am somebody who likes to be able to try to help people. And luckily enough, I found this job that kind of went hand in hand with everything that I want to do and be involved with. And they say a lot of people who go into this line of work is because of their past. And it can be triggering, but also I feel we can be empathetic to the people that we help, because we understand where they are coming from. And even though I don't ever fully share my past history with the people that I'm working with, I understand where they're coming from. So hopefully they know and feel comfortable talking to me and know that I'm not going to judge them. I think that's a big concern people have when they come into my office, is that we're not going to believe them or we're going to judge them. And that's not it at all. And sometimes they need somebody there just to listen and not tell them, well, you need to just leave. You need to just do this, because it's not that easy. And being able to also be one to empower them through the process, aside from being a listening ear, it's what makes the job worth it to me. Just because sometimes they really don't have anybody else to turn to or talk to. And so I appreciate when they feel comfortable enough to talk to me and, ask me for help.
Yeah, because you are a lifeline. I mean, I know in my own situation, I was so isolated and shameful. Even if you do have people that might help, you are so full of shame that I know for me, it was, I never wanted to tell my parents, and they didn't know till years and years and years later after I'd been divorced. There's a shame there, because I didn't want them to say, I told you so. You shouldn't have married him, or we saw this in him. I always had this, my mother's mantra was, you made your bed, lie in it. And so that kept me in it for so long, because that's what went through my head, that I was programmed, is when you make a choice, you're stuck. And so coming to you and having that lifeline, I never had a lifeline. And we were in the military, and the military really does not provide. And I'm so glad that you're in a government agency that is helping people. But I can say, back in the 90s, I don't know how the military is now, they were not advocates for helping with domestic violence. The wife was you felt like you were re-victimized if you did go for help when, like, hey, we got into this fight, and they'd say, okay, you guys go to a counselor and everything will be good. They bred alcoholics in the military. So I think empowerment is a great word. And how do you empower them when they come to you? Because I feel as a life coach, I have so much freedom outside of the guidelines of even therapists and counselors who have modalities. They have to sort of stay in these steps. And as a life coach, I have this freedom to be able to tell my story to my clients and say, oh my gosh, I've been there. How do you help them and how do you empower them without saying, hey, I've been there?
One thing I tell people a lot, because they'll come in here and they'll start telling me about their story, and some people will come in a couple times. They've been people that have gone back, and then they come into my office again and they'll say, I was so stupid, I should have known. And the one thing I tell them is, you are not stupid. Like, this is a cycle that is easy to get sucked into. It is not your fault. And I try to remind them of that. And I try to remind them also, because there's people that come in and they know that what has happened is wrong, but they still love the other person. And they'll say, I know that sounds stupid, that I still care about them. And it sounds crazy to some, but it's understandable, because there are good times that have happened. And a lot of times people try to hold on to those good times, or they at least remember them and they still care about the person they're with. And so I just try to, for one thing, remind people, don't be ashamed of how you're feeling. And every case is different. Every domestic violence situation is different. And they've come from a place where they've been put down so much and told what to do. I don't want them to feel that way when they come into our office for help. I want them to know they can be open and honest, and I'm not going to criticize them or tell them, well, this is what you need to do, because that's not the approach to take in my mind. And so that's kind of what I try to do to help with my empowerment, is just to remind them it's not okay what happened. You don't need to be ashamed of your feelings, and you're not going to be judged, for talking about your thoughts on things. So, and encourage them to ask questions if they have questions.
I love that, because it's validation. You're questioning yourself a million times a day when you're in these situations, when you're in an abusive relationship. And not only, are other people saying, why don't you just leave? Why don't you just get out of it? It's so simple. It's not that simple. And then I used to tell my dad, you can't beat me up more than I already beat me up. And so you're right, coming into a judgment-free space with you and you validating, you're not stupid, don't feel shame, we're here for you. They have to take the step, but they need to trust someone outside of this relationship in order to take those steps, because they've been love bombed so much. They think the only person in the world for them is this person, because this person has groomed them to think that. And so when you finally get someone in your office, I picture it just as, this is that opportunity, that thread that you're like, okay, just hold on to this thread and we can get you out of this. What kind of resources do government agencies offer for people who are in these situations? What kind of finances or child care or anything like that?
I'm sure it's different with each state or county. I am in a smaller county, and so unfortunately our resources are more limited. But there is, if you are a person who has experienced domestic violence and you have children, there is a domestic violence grant through the Department of Human and Social Services. There's also, in my county, we have an agency called Community Action Team, and they can also help with housing, paying for first and last month's rent or moving costs. We have our domestic violence and sexual assault women's shelter, that also has advocates as a place for a victim and her family or his family to go. And then one thing that's used quite a bit that I've seen in our county is restraining orders, which I know people say is just a piece of paper, and in a way, yes, but it's also a court order that gives our law enforcement more permission to get involved if they are called. So those are some of the main resources here.
That's a lot. I mean, you say you're a small county and you're limited. That's a lot for a little county. I'm impressed. I'm really impressed with those resources that are offered, especially with the housing. Because I know for me and most, when you're in that situation, part of the reason you don't leave, a big part of the reason you don't leave is finances. You know, you're being financially abused if you're being psychologically, mentally, and physically and sexually abused. It usually is right in there in that grouping. So that's what we need more of. And my daughter, unfortunately, continued this cycle, and she got into a domestic violence marriage as well. And I remember reaching out here in a big city, mind you, for assistance to get her into housing, and they were not helping very much. And I'm pretty surprised that it's not how small your county is, it's how willing your county is to put the money toward those programs. Because I didn't feel like, and my daughter had 3 kids, and so they looked at it as if, well, if your mom has a place for you to stay, why aren't you just going to stay there? Well, I was a single parent and I was barely making our own bills and then to feed her and 3 children, but they didn't see it that way. You had to be absolutely desolate here and I'm in Mesa, Arizona, for them to give my daughter any help. And I think that's discouraging. And they don't have vehicles to go get jobs. They didn't have vehicles to take their children to childcare. So I think we could do better. I think you guys are a pretty good example of how we could do better in these areas, or having grants for just living expenses and the financial means for people to get out of these domestic situations.
Yeah, we definitely could use more funds in our county. But yes, it is nice having agencies to reach out to who are willing to help. And I'm really glad you mentioned the financial part, because one of the things that I'm most passionate about, spreading the word on is domestic violence is not always physical. And I'm not trying to minimize the physical, because I know that is very traumatic and painful, and that takes time to heal from as well. I just also wanted to shed light on that domestic violence can be mental and emotional or financial or sexual. Because I know just from people who I work with and from my own past, since I didn't have the marks to show the abuse, I felt people wouldn't believe me, or they would think I was over exaggerating. And that, I think, is a big reason why sometimes people stay suffering in silence, is because they don't feel anybody's going to believe them. And it's just going to be kind of embarrassing or discouraging, which they don't need any more of that in their life.
Yeah. And because I'm such an advocate for mental health awareness, I agree. I think the courts need to recognize mental and psychological abuse more or as much as physical. I know here in Arizona, our juvenile courts, we have a system where they don't remove a child from a home unless there is an imminent physical danger. And that's wrong, because I'm in the process of getting guardianship of my 14-year-old grandson, and they don't recognize if it's an unhealthy mental environment. And I think you're right. My worst relationship was the one with the psychological abuse, and they never laid a hand on me.
Yeah, exactly. And our system here is the same, and it's so frustrating. I just helped somebody file a restraining order, but because there was not physical harm done yet, it didn't get granted. And it's to tell you that somebody actually tried taking a step to protect themselves and then is told, well, since you haven't been physically abused, it's not considered, imminent danger or abuse. And then that person leaves, for them to decide to come back is less likely, you
Yeah.
know? And it's so frustrating to me, which is what has actually encouraged me to become even more passionate about spreading some light on, this is not okay. The emotional abuse is also can take longer to heal from. You can carry the effects of it into your next relationship that could be completely a healthy relationship, but you're so ingrained from the abusive one, it takes a lot of work to move forward from that. And it just frustrates me that I feel like people don't acknowledge the seriousness of the other forms of abuse sometimes.
Yes, I agree 100%. What can we do to advocate for that? Do we call our congressmen? What do we do? What do you think would be a good way to change this? To be a what is it? Be the change you want to see in the world? What can we do? What part can we help in that?
I would love to know. I've even been asking that here, like even just with the wording of our restraining orders, it limits, what people can be considered as qualifying for it. And that's not okay. And I mean, and like I said, somebody finally is hesitant but applies for that restraining order and then is told what you're going through is not abuse, they're probably not going to come back again, and I feel it's so wrong, and it's almost doing more of a disservice. It's putting people almost in more harm because they're not going to reach out for help. And so I would love to advocate and know who I can talk to shed some light on this, that we need to not make everything try to fit in a little box, because not every abusive relationship is the same, and
Yeah.
that needs to be remembered. So
I
I would love to know who I can talk to.
I think you said it really, really well. The wording of the RO, the criteria for the ROs, because, and luckily I was able to get my RO without physical abuse. So it's backward. There's no consistency, I think, depending on where you live, there's no consistency across the board. And they have upped, say, their stalking laws, because mine was a stalker and a harasser. And excuse me. But do you know, in order to get that RO, I had to prove how many texts and how many emails and phone calls. And I mean, the documentation, my life was consumed with it. It was witnesses, as a neighbor saw them drive by, or I had to have loads and loads and loads and loads and loads of proof. And literally, this person was like stalking and harassing. And I think there were over 400 texts in a month. I mean, it was just absolutely, in addition to phone calls and all that. So I think you're right, the wording of the RO, and let's get stiffer on these stalking and harassment, because I'm going to say this, most homicidal cases where it's a domestic violence, intimate partner homicide, is when the person is leaving. And that is when the harassment and the stalking happens. Maybe they're not beating them up right then, but that stalking and that harassment, it builds. It builds to that point when you shut down that abuser or that narcissistic personality. They don't want that. They want to have that control. And when they lose that control, that's when it gets dangerous. Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And one thing also is, at least here, even if it's text messages, they have to have a certain amount of a threat in them for it to be considered serious stalking behavior. And that's where it's like, to the person who's receiving the messages, they know what the abuser is implying, which is why they're terrified. But since the abuser didn't flat out say, I'm going to come to your house tonight, to some, it's technically not stalking. And that's where it's so frustrating, because people are reaching out for help to protect themselves, but because they might not have a blunt message of saying, this is what this person's going to do to me, they aren't able to get that help that they need.
Yeah. Like they have to use specific words. I'm going to come in and do this. But when you've been groomed by this person, you know what certain sayings mean. You know, it preceded an argument that ended up in domestic violence. So you're right. It shouldn't be so cut and dry. It shouldn't be black and white. If you get hit, okay, now we've got domestic violence. It's really terrible that the victim has to make so much. It's like going to court, right? You have the burden of proof when you're, when you're the state, right? Or the petitioner. And it's so unfair that a victim should have to do so much of the proving. And I know we have victims advocates, and maybe that would be an area where victims advocates could do a little more of the investigating part of it, where the petitioner didn't have all the weight of the burden of proof.
Yeah, and that is one thing because that's one thing that our office does help with is restraining orders. And I do tell people sometimes it is all about the wording that you use when applying for the restraining order or the amount of information you put in. And we will meet with victims and we'll spend time, going through and making a timeline of what had been happening, or helping them print off text messages or emails or pictures. But even with that, sometimes it still doesn't pay off. And that's where the frustration sets in, especially when you have taken the time to try to cover all the bases, hoping that you are providing enough proof for it to be believed by the courts that, okay, they do qualify for this protective order. And so, yeah, it's a system that needs fixed. And I know I'm not the first or last person to say that, but I definitely agree with everybody else that has said that.
But your word has weight because you're in it. It's easy for me to sit out here. I've never worked in the legal system, and I've never worked directly with these victims. I've only been on the other side. So you matter because you're right there. You're in the thick of it, and you've also been on the other side as well. So I take your word with so much weight and so much value. And we need to just rally and go to our congressman or go to, whoever we need to go to somehow change. That's how laws get changed. Someone has to speak up, and I'm on board with you. So if you end up in front of a committee, in front of, in front of Congress, I'm right there by your side. In my book, My Dog is My Relationship Coach, one of my chapters is about abuse. And I talk about the same thing, my story, and that abuse is not love. And we get those mixed up. When you haven't had love and you have an attachment style that is codependent, you misconstrue sometimes the abuse for love and the gaslighting. And those are the really important things, is when you're losing a piece of yourself every time someone tells you it's your fault or you're crazy. And so, listeners, if any of you are in that situation, you're getting separated from family, they're telling you you're not worthy, they're love bombing you, they are taking away your ability to be financially independent, or any of that, or threatening to take your children if you leave. Any of those things is abuse, and you need to reach out to your local domestic violence or police, whatever you need to do. With Google, it's great. We didn't have Google back in the 90s. I couldn't just Google help for domestic violence. So it's great that we have at least resources that way with the internet. So that brings me to your lovely book. And I want to know about, why you wrote the book and how your healing journey ended up really showing you your self-worth. And I know you're happily married now as well. So am I, because common thread, we found our worth. Tell us how the story happened with the writing of the book and how you healed.
So I woke up one Saturday morning with the idea I need to write a book about domestic violence. I don't know why, I just had this urge. And once I started writing, I just couldn't stop. My first thought was I was going to write about the 7 years of working domestic violence cases and just what I've learned. Not to be specific about one case, but just in general. And to try to share some information about the different forms of domestic violence, to try to answer some of those common questions people ask, and to also shed a little light on what can happen when a person is able to leave, because their life doesn't just miraculously get better.
Right.
And I wanted it to be a real, but like I didn't want, for lack of better words, I didn't want to dumb it down. I wanted it to be raw and real, and I did. That's why I do have a trigger warning in it. But as I was writing it, it really did become therapeutic. I didn't realize it at first, but a lot of what I wrote in my book is my own experiences. So everything in that book I have experienced to some degree. And my book does not involve children, because that's a topic that brings a lot more information, which is actually what my next book that I've started is going to include. Wow. Because I feel it's very important to shed light and information on the struggles of a domestic violence survivor who does have children and going through the system, and that cycle of abuse. But for my first book, it does take you on the journey through the main character and the triumphs and traumas of her abusive relationship. And I wrote this book hoping to make it relatable to a wide audience. So even if you have been in a domestic violence relationship, but say it wasn't physical, maybe you could relate to one of the other experiences that the character has. And maybe you haven't had children, but say you have a pet. One thing abusers can tend to do as a form of control is to threaten to harm something or someone that you love. And so in my book, my character, he does have a dog. Don't worry, nothing terrible happens to the dog. I stopped reading my own book, and that was the case. In fact, the dog in the book is after my own dog, Luna, at home. And so I will say were parts that were kind of hard to write, but once again, it's real. And that's why I put it in there. And I know it might sound a little extreme of somebody being jealous of a pet, but believe it or not, I have had people in my office who they don't have children, but they have, in some cases, a dog or a cat or whatever animal, but the abuser will say, you're spending more time with them, or you're giving your dog more attention than you ever give me. And so that is kind of why I incorporated something in the book that means a lot to the main character. So I really wrote the book hoping I could reach a lot of people. And then that's just my goal.
It sounds so impactful, but also like really engaging and interesting. So, I mean, I write nonfiction, and mine's engaging too, because it has stories of the dogs and how we related to our lives. But I love that you took a character that you walk through with them and all the things that happen, which is informative because it was realistic, because it's what you went through and it's what you see on a daily basis. You're absolutely right about the dogs. They don't care. If it's something that is priority to them, they're going to want to remove that. That's why they separate you and isolate you from family and friends too, because they never want you to ever rely on anyone but them. That's how they maintain their control, and they can make you do whatever it is they want you to do. So I'm happy that the puppy was okay, but you are correct that is a very realistic thing, and abusers will be jealous of, especially an animal who is so unconditional and gives a victim comfort and gives them that love And the abuser wants to be that end all be all. And you know what? I'm going to say this, you will never supersede a dog. Okay. So nice try. So I just love it, guys. The book is called The Ones Left Behind the Scenes of Domestic Violence. And that's a great title. It really says everything we wanted to say. And I do love, excuse me, that you're going to involve the children, because that was a big struggle for me, having the children. Dad was every other weekend, no child support, barely showed up. I went to get financial assistance. I was working full time, and I was turned away after I paid all the bills of the month because he wasn't paying any of them. I had no money left over for groceries, and all I wanted was maybe a couple $100 to get me through for groceries. And they turned me down. They said that my car was worth too much money. And I said, but I'm not asking for childcare. I'm not asking for housing. I'm not asking for health care. I'm not asking for anything except a little bit of groceries for my kids. My neighbor ended up calling CPS on me. And she meant well. She was a little old lady. And she, I think, was just calling to find out if she could help me get some help. She used to leave loaves of bread and fruit on my front door. It was the cutest thing. And it's that it had to go to that extreme. And I'm like, oh my God, my first fear was they're going to take my kids, because that's what you're going to fear if you can't take care of them. Again, the state doesn't care if you can take care of them or not. All they see is if they're in imminent danger. And they're not seeing I'm a struggling mother working to pay all these bills and feed it. No one's knocking on his door, forcing him to buy groceries or diapers. I mean, my son was 10 months old when we got divorced. My girls were 6 and 8. So it was a really, really trying time. I used to I'm not going to be shameful of this. I'm proud that I'm a thriver. But I used to go around collecting aluminum cans to go get milk for my 10-month-old. So it's those situations where I don't think people really understand, once you're out of it, how hard it is to survive. And sometimes we stay in it. And I know I did for 10 years. We stay in it because it's easier. I can put up with the abuse, then my children won't suffer. But if I leave, then my kids aren't going to get milk, or they're not going to get groceries. That's a big factor. If we could help out substantially in finances and in resources, that might make it easier for some of our DV survivors.
I agree 100% on that. And that is a big part of why I've been starting this second book, because I have seen the struggles that the survivors go through after being out of the relationship, and how the abuser can still use forms of abuse through, say, the court system even. I have moms that are told they have to send their kids to see the dad for his time, and the dad either doesn't do anything with the kids or belittles the kids or just questions them about their mom. And yet, if the mom doesn't send them, then, she's afraid she's going to get in trouble, but the kids will come back from the dad's house upset or unhappy. And it's such a struggle that I have a few cases in particular right now, and it's just, I feel for these moms because they feel they're in a no-win situation, and some of them are trying to survive financially. The ex's name is on all of the bills, so they don't know what bills to pay, even though they're the ones in the house, and the abuser will refuse to tell them. Or they're afraid the abuser will turn the power off on them because they have that bill in their name. And it's just, it is hard. And I can see sometimes why people do go back. I'm seeing the struggle that some of these moms and I know it can be dads too. I'm just going off of my main caseload is female.
Yep.
But that these moms are struggling right now with their kids, and their kids are being affected by it. And it's sad to see.
It's 100%. I mean, you're looking at a case that would have been in front of you. My son had ADHD, and we got him on medication when he was 7. And when he would go to his father's for the weekend, his dad wouldn't give it to him. Refused to give it to him, and he would come home and he would be bouncing off the walls. And his dad was very sexist and had no respect for women. And here my little 9-year-old would come home and making these comments, and I would be like, oh my God, I knew I had to undo everything that was done that weekend that he came home. Or I would say, like I said, I didn't have a lot of money. So I would say, hey, can you maybe get him a haircut this weekend? And he'd go, that's what child support is for. Now, mind you, he was behind for 10 years. When he caught up, he took me back to court to lower it. I mean, it was just like, what? I think women, this is what we have to deal with until I couldn't wait till my youngest was 18. I could not wait to never have to see that man again. And I never have to see that man again. And I never talk, my two of my 3 don't even speak with him. And honestly, my son has no respect for his dad. They all love my husband. But you're right. It's damaging. It is so damaging to these kids. As a life coach, I'm getting now the adults that came from those households because of this war, because there was no co-parenting. I envy my husband and his ex-wife, the way they co-parented. He tells me how they did it, and I just look in awe and go, I can't even imagine how nice that would have been. I mean, my husband paid for everything. They shared the college costs. They worked together. They still are friends to this day. When you are in those situations with those types, especially when you have children, you're going to have to deal with them for the rest of your life. And it's hard. It is hard.
Especially when one parent refuses to cooperate. I mean, I have moms who are willing to bend over backwards to, help if a father wants to pick the child up earlier on a Saturday than normal. I have moms okay with that. But if the dad is wanting the child a day early and the child's not wanting to go a day early, and then the mom, advocates on the child's behalf that they're prepared to go tomorrow, they're used to their schedule, and then the dad accuses the mom of breaking up the family or withholding their child from them. And, or when the children does come back and their mood is different because dad put them down the whole weekend. And I've had some cases I have brought up to DHS, and because there's one protective parent, they won't get involved. And I understand they have their own policies and procedures, and I'm not aware of what all of them are. But when I'm also told, well, it sounds like a custody dispute and they need to learn to just get along and co-parent, it's not that easy. I have proof of a mom trying so hard to work with this dad, and he is not having it. And, and it's so frustrating to me. I just feel there's not enough help out there for people.
And you're right. I've been in front of so many judges, and they don't want to deal with it. They see this all the time, and they just think it's 2 parents fighting over the kids. No, I want to work with you. I want you to work with me. And not only have I done it with my own children, but seeing it with my grandchildren, with their parents, with my grandchildren's parents, my daughter and hers. It's crazy. It's not always that cut and dried. So that brings me to, as we wrap up here, I always ask at the end of the podcast, this is perfect. You're marching down your street with people behind you with your banner. What does your banner say to change the world? What are you gonna tell the world that you want to change?
Oh boy, where to start? I want people you find their voice, use their voice, encourage others to use their voice, stop judging each other, stop spending all your time tearing each other down, and let's work on picking each other up, and be open that not every situation's the same. We can't try to shove everything in the same box. It's not going to help. So, I mean, that's the biggest thing that I'm passionate about, and I just want people to know. So.
Yeah, and you see it every day. You live it every day. It is your life's work. I think it's your purpose. You found your purpose. You are such a beautiful soul, and doing something as a light worker in this world that's hard and painful and great and needed. And I'm so proud of you, and I hope you're proud of yourself as well. So what, as we all also finish, what do you do for you? What's your shameless self-indulgence?
Oh boy. Aside from writing, I love my kids. They are, 12, 11, and 8. They're busy in sports. I love being a mom. I love my dog Luna, and like in my book, we do play fetch every single night. I mean, she'll play fetch until I have to put the ball up or hide it. And I love to draw. So just some things where I can just relax and not have such high emotion is really what I need in my life, and laughter. So anything that makes me laugh is great.
I love it. That's so key, is that we need to do that self-care where we have to do something brainless. We have to do something that's just joyful and fun. And so what kind of dog is Luna?
She is a pug terrier.
Oh, energetic. Oh.
Yes, she's got big round pug eyes, but like a terrier body, and I mean, she's adorable, and she loves to play fetch. So it's her favorite thing in the world.
Oh my gosh, that's an interesting combination. My sister has a pug named Bruce, and I didn't know they were really energetic. I think my sisters are kind of chill and kind of lay around. So maybe the terrier makes her.
There's the terrier in her. So.
I will see your Luna, and I will raise you one border collie named Callie that we call Crazy Train, because you want to play fetch. You can play fetch for 8 hours if you'd like with this Crazy Train, or as my husband says, Captain Chaos. So, yeah, when we took in my grandson, we also took in my daughter's dog, and I absolutely adore her. She's on the cover of my wherever it is. She's on the cover. This is Captain Chaos right here. This is Captain Chaos.
Oh, adorable.
So when you hear the barking, it's usually her. Let me see Luna.
Yes, this is.
Oh my gosh. Now that is the cutest combo. It almost looks like a puggle. Like, yeah. I don't see pug in there, and I don't see terrier in there. It's like this perfect 50-50 combination where she got like the best qualities of both.
I know, and this is literally her face every time I'm holding her ball and getting ready to throw it.
Of course it is.
I hate to say it in this way, but if you do read the book, that's the dog that I was picturing and talking about. So,
of course, you have to use your own experiences. That's, as authors, that's what we do, is we pull from our knowledge bases. Well, Erin, it has been an absolute joy to have you here. I am so grateful for the time that you gave us. So much knowledge, so much information and help. I think there are listeners out there. If we just Starfish Story and we make a difference for one person today, I am just so grateful that you came and you took the time for us today. And I hope you had fun.
I did. Thank you so much. I feel like we covered a lot of good information, and I really do hope that it has touched people, and knowing that they're not alone in whatever they're experiencing.
That's right. The message will get to those who need it for sure, because I believe that. I believe that that's the beauty of doing the podcast and being able to share this so people can hear other people's story. I mean, two of us sit in here. I'm now a life coach. You're doing domestic violence good in a court in the court arena. So there's hope. And that's what I always want to end these podcasts with, is that there is hope. If you're out there and you feel hopeless, never doubt your worth and your ability to create your life. And you can do it. It's not easy, but you can do it. I promise you. And when you're on the other side of it, you're going to look back, believe it or not, with gratitude for what you have. So thank you, my dear. And I hope you have a fabulous weekend.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks, love. So everybody, if you want to get a hold of my lovely guest, Miss Erin, you can, where I'm looking for your website, you can, where would they find your book, and where will they find a way to comment and reach out to you?
Yes. So my book is available on Amazon and Kindle. You could just type in The Ones Left Behind, Erin Hass, and that should help you be able to find it. I believe my website is connected to Amazon. And then I have Facebook, Instagram, any of those are other ways to reach out to me. And I'm happy to hear from people. So don't hesitate, please.
Absolutely. And when I post your episode, I'm going to get all of those links up there. So I'll make sure that I get your Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of it, so everybody can easily find you and reach out and connect with you. And yes, we love it when you comment, listeners. I love that you're here, you're listening, you're subscribing. Give us a 5-star review. We are currently at all 5 stars, and I'm really happy. I want to keep that momentum going. And if you need any life coaching, I'm at lifecoachmaureen.com. And this is what I specialize in, relationship coaching. And being that my own story has that experience with it, it makes me an expert in the field. Not just once, not just twice, but many, many times, and different types of relationships. And it all differs. So I have gratitude for my experience that I can bring forward and help others. So we also have a doggy boutique. So don't forget to go to mydogIsEverything.net, where it's holistic and healthy treats, only 3 ingredients, no preservatives, no dyes, none of that, no chemicals. And you can get, for you, Erin, you can get a matching Mom and Luna shirt, and for each, there's bandanas and there's shirts. I do tie-dyes. Yeah, it's really a fun site. Plus safety items. Plus, like, safety items when they're in the car, and little seat belts. And so lots of fun stuff. Go check it out, guys. MyDogIsEverything.net. Thank you all for being here. And I love you all. I want you all to be well and be happy. Until our next episode, we will see you later.
Thank you for tuning in to the I Never Knew podcast. If you found today's episode inspiring and educational, please be sure to follow, subscribe, and spread the word. The more people that join the Inc. community, the more it can develop and influence others as we work together for a healthier and brighter future. Until next time.